Welcome to the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Britt Sorensen. The aim of this podcast is to grow, strengthen and promote research on women in sport and exercise with the ultimate goal of optimising women's athletic success and their participation. With these podcasts, we wish to bring you information from leading academics, experts and practitioners involved in research or work with women in sport and exercise. So providing you with advice and support for your research and activities, as well as advice on exercise and performance improvement for women. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Simone Fullagar and Dr. Adele Pavlidis. Dr. Simone Fullagar is Professor and Chair of the Sport and Gender Equity Research Hub at Griffith University, Australia. She's published feminist interdisciplinary sociological research using post-qualitative approaches across sport, leisure and mental health fields. Simone collaborates with colleagues on a number of art projects that address gender equity and diverse forms of embodied movement. Her most recent book is with Adele Pavlidis and Wendy O'Brien, which is 2025 Feminist Futures for Sport, tracing the effective dynamics of gender equity in sport organisations. Palgrave. Simone lives on the unceded lands of the Yugambeh and Kombumerri peoples of Gold Coast. Excuse my pronunciation there. And Dr. Adele Pavlidis is an associate professor in sociology with the School of Humanities, Languages and Social Science, and previously a DECRA Fellow 2018 to 21. She's author of 3 books: Sport, Gender and Power, The Rise of Roller Derby, 2016, Feminism and a Vital Politics of Depression and Recovery, also authored with Simone and Wendy O'Brien, and Feminist Futures in Sport, Exploring the Effective Dynamics, as mentioned earlier. She's published widely on a wide range of sociocultural issues in sport and leisure, with a focus on gender and power relations. Theoretically, her work traverses contemporary scholarship on affect, power and organisations, and she's deeply interested in social, cultural and personal transformation and the entanglements between people, organisations and well-being. She's currently director of the Griffith Centre for Social and Cultural Research, treasurer of the Australian Women's and Gender Studies Association and co-chair of the Sport and Gender Equity SAGE Research Hub at Griffith University. So without further ado, welcome to you both. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are now? You've been collaborating for well over a decade, so how does it all work out with in terms of your background and how you led to working with each other?
Thank you, Britta. We're delighted to be here. I'll start first if you like. It's Simone speaking. I suppose I have been an academic now for nearly 30 years, and I've always had an interest in feminist scholarship. And originally it was around leisure and sport. So it has evolved over time in terms of an interest in how we understand power relations and how we understand embodied movement. And more recently, just given the shifts and changes in higher education and universities, my focus has been more on organised sport and also, other forms of physical activity. So this research has not just been about sport and gender equity, but it's been, a kind of bigger project connecting movement with health and well-being. So Adele and I have collaborated for a number of years now because she was originally a PhD student studying the new sport of roller derby, which is very exciting. And our collaboration has continued on because we're very interested in these directions. And I suppose for me that evolution has also been a theoretical one because I was trained originally in post-structural feminism and feminist philosophy, and then that has moved into kind of post-human and post-qualitative methods. So I've always been interested in that kind of creative connection around knowledge production and power. So it's not just about kind of the constraints and inequalities, but it's also what can we do with feminist knowledge that is generative and productive and affects change in different ways.
Excellent.
I'll add a little bit to that. So how did I end up here is a good question. I think, I suppose I did my, PhD. I was originally doing a PhD about young people's mental health and addiction. And I found Simone because she had done some work around depression and young people and suicide. So that's how we originally connected, and that was the original project. And about 1 month into the project, I was reading Nicholas Rose on governmentality and Lisa Blackman, a critical psychologist, feminist, and I just felt like I couldn't do that topic. And I asked for a meeting with Simone, and I called her up and I said, I don't think I can do this. And she was very calm about it. And I said, could I do a PhD about roller derby instead? And she said, yes. And she was in a department of sport management at the time. So it was a bit odd doing a project about mental health. So doing a sport project was actually a lot better. And I think in a way, from there, things just really sped up. So for me, I joined a league and I started to reflect on the role of sport in society, on gender, and particularly these dynamics of inclusion and exclusion in sport. So who gets to participate, who gets authority in those spaces, who gets to, create rules, who gets to say who gets to play, all of these issues around power, and not just, in a binary sense in terms of men and women, it's also between women as well. So in thinking about gender more expansively than just as these kind of two categories of male and female. And since then, I did that project on roller derby. It was in around 2010, and kind of sport really, and women's sport really exploded in the public sphere. It was always happening, but I do think in the past, probably, in the time that I've been an academic and doing my PhD, the visibility of women in sport has just exploded. We also had the Me Too movement, like a range of social cultural things that have happened that have also influenced sport. So I'm really interested in, thinking beyond the sport bubble as this special different place, and thinking about its entanglements with culture more broadly. Thinking about, as you said in the bio, relationships to well-being, mental health. This idea of, I suppose, being, achieving what you want to achieve in life, whether you're an athlete or somebody just participating in a community club, how can we enable people to live the lives that they want to live? And particularly for girls and women who have been so, restricted in many ways as to what they have been able to do. So that's just a little.
It sounds really interesting, both of you, actually. Are you able to go into a little bit more detail and tell us about the sort of the previous research? I mean, you've obviously conducted quite a lot of different research dating back to the roller derby, which I'm particularly interested about with the cultural elements, and particularly pain, which was something that I was looking at in my thesis. But also, you've talked about para-sportswomen research through some of your Australian research council projects and things like that. I'd love to hear more about those, either the articles, the books, and some of the projects. A lot to unpick there, so I'll leave that to you two to decide who starts and etc. But go ahead.
Okay, maybe I'll just jump in to start with project, just picking up on thinking about pain and embodiment and mental health as our kind of interest in these entanglements. Is, a few years ago I had an ARC grant looking at women's recovery from depression, And then by the time we got to kind of writing that up, and Adele came on board, as well as Wendy O'Brien, who was a PhD student at the time, we wrote a book that was really trying to push the boundaries using post-qualitative ideas and practices around pushing beyond mind and body as separate, or body as machine to be, you know, pushed in sport or movement, and really thinking about the way in which movement was supportive for women's well-being and what recovery meant for them, because they did, you know, talk a lot about the intersection of mind and body and pain, and the way in which, yeah, their mental health and their physical health were interrelated, and the effects of inequalities, everything from gender-based violence, childhood abuse, through to employment inequalities, and in difficulty accessing sport or physical activity that was actually supportive and encouraging. So I think just, you know, that intersection of understanding how our mental health and our physical health and embodied experience are really interconnected. Like, that project really helped me think through those deep entanglements beyond just thinking as a sociologist, as the world is constructed of meaning and language. Actually, we need a much more interdisciplinary, deeper understanding of the biopsychosocial all being part of our reality and infused with power relations and multiple affects. So I suppose that was a pivotal moment for then jumping in ahead into some of the other projects that we'll talk about today. But I'll throw the ball to Adele.
Yeah, just building on that, thinking about, you know, I think that book was really important in, you know, a lot of the times what we think of as kind of the evidence base for a therapy, for example, or it could be for an exercise, even in when it comes to elite sport and performance. What might work for one person, you know, in a clinical setting, when taken out of that clinical setting, it's a whole another case, and it's so dependent on the environment, the people delivering it, all of those different material relations that are in place. And I think that's what's often left out of the broader discussion around sports science or even sports sociology, is the very contextual, contingent nature of whatever it might be, you know, whether it's a therapy or an exercise or a program or a policy, and really trying to grapple with those complexities as they're lived and experienced by people. And another thing, just, you know, the importance of mental health and well-being. You know, we know that women and girls and gender diverse people will experience, you know, violence at very high rates across their lifetime, of some kind of sexual harassment, violence, experience inequalities. So coming at women's experiences of sport through a kind of trauma-informed lens that can try and hold that harm while supporting people in movement, I think is really important, and something that's missed. It's like trauma-informed is only for a specific population, for example, rather than something that as a society we can think of as important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Some of the ultra endurance athletes I interviewed, a few of them had experienced trauma in the past, and that informed their pain experience and how they framed it, and the pain tolerance, and it perhaps informed that. And for some with mental health issues, the emotional pain was worse or more or harder to tolerate than the actual physical pain. The physical pain was nothing in terms of how they viewed coping with that. So that was quite an interesting finding that came through when I was talking about the experiences, and that it wasn't just a physical, you know, the actual physical type of pain related to exercise or injury. It was a form of coping as well. So yeah, I think as well, from what you're saying, is that the form of no one size fits all approach is quite an interesting one as well, because an interdisciplinary approach to supporting women generally, I think, is a really important factor, and understanding their context as well, their background. So yeah, that's really interesting. Could you share some more of your work as well, please, and the projects?
Yeah, if I can just jump off from what you've said, Britta, I'm thinking about a project I've been doing. Adele's been involved, but it's been largely led by our colleague, Dr. Georgia Munro-Cook, who's also a Paralympic athlete and team captain of the Australian Gliders women's wheelchair basketball team. We've been looking at the experiences of elite para-sportswomen who were qualifying for Paris recently, Paris Games. And we were really interested in understanding the intersectional experience of disability and gender, at least, and beyond, in relation to their experiences of playing in teams, often mixed gender, thinking about their experience of coaching and how that pathway to the elite experience was shaped. And I'm really thinking about their experiences. Pain was one, of course, and in its multiplicity, but also the way in which they had experienced kind of a deep gendered ableism, where their bodies were still positioned as not sources of expertise, particularly by coaches, and that often resulted in a whole lot of shaming practices around their bodies, particularly body shaming and weight. As well as, then the practical implications of that, of not being heard or seen in terms of their needs being met. So if they actually had physical pain, their coaches were saying, train harder, and ignoring them. So there were just a whole lot of really important but often invisible power relations that were shaping their experience. And this is at the elite end of sport, where we're still seeing a disregard and a deep disrespect for women's embodied experiences. And I think that really speaks to the importance of understanding those affective dynamics, because they're playing out in such normalized ways. It makes it really difficult, in this case, for women athletes to speak back to particularly coaches in positions of power. And so, if we're talking about that's happening at that end, what is also happening at the community end when, women are just coming to try and play something for the first time, or girls are, or gender diverse people, and they're not experiencing a welcoming environment, or not having their needs respected or listened to. So I think, there's such danger in the normative approaches to sport. And I think that's really what our work is trying to shake up. Like, we can't just keep doing it the way it's always been done, because it hasn't been a sports system that has respected the diversity of women's experiences and gender diverse experiences.
So just adding to that, thinking about a project I'm working on with Dr. Hannah Adler, who is a health sociologist and works around a lot around drugs. So we're doing a project on medicinal cannabis and sport. And, medicinal cannabis is a banned substance with WADA because it meets it. So prohibited substances have to meet 2 out of 3 of the criteria. So the first criteria is performance enhancing. And so the WADA has said that it's not performance enhancing, so it doesn't meet that criteria. The other 2 criteria are risk to athlete, which they've determined that medicinal cannabis poses a risk to athlete, which it certainly can for some people, as does a range of antidepressants and antipsychotics present risks to the athlete, depending on the person and things like that. So, and the third criteria is that it is against the spirit of sport. And so it's been determined that medicinal cannabis does not meet that spirit of sport criteria. And that is where I think I'm really thinking about, what is the spirit of sport? This is that normative, you can't question it. It's the spirit of sport, If you're against the spirit of sport, who even are you, And I think we need to shift more towards this materiality of sport, because the spirit of sport as this kind of unquestionable, just awe-inspiring thing that has excluded, marginalised women and girls, trans people, queer people. It's racialized, it's classed, There is a real need to queer that normative spirit of sport. And I do think it's happening in pockets. I do feel like there is an opportunity, a great opportunity for sport to lead the way in troubling these conservative notions. But as we've heard recently, it looks like, we're also going backwards when it comes to the International Olympic Committee's ban and things like that. But I think that, medicinal cannabis is a great case to think about that. Well, what is the spirit of sport? And this kind of normative idea of what sport is and who is an athlete, and who can be involved.
What was asking a question about the medicinal cannabis? What was the purpose within the research? What was the purpose of that being administered or taken in the context? Just give a little context.
So the research that we did 10 interviews with a range of people, from athletes to former athletes to people working in sport. So primarily it was around pain and sleep, which is why people were using it. And sleep is a social issue. Who gets kind of that luxury of sleep? And it is very gendered. It's very classed as well, because people experiencing stress will not sleep as well. So it's all about recovery, really, and an athlete's kind of integrity and well-being in recovering, which I think is really something to be aware of.
Okay. And I guess like with the pain and the disability as well, I'm picking that from earlier as well, is the awareness between different types of pain relating to a disability or a condition that they have chronically, or pain relating to sport or exercise, or if it's on the verge, and awareness going into potential from niggle into a serious injury, and it's understanding that and then being heard and understood from that. So there's that kind of education point from the medical practitioners, the athlete, as well as the coach, or if there's a psychologist who's working with them to help cope with those different strategies for pain, as well as focusing on their particular sport as well. So I think that's quite an important area. And I'm not sure, but I would probably say that there's probably a lack of research around that as well, that could be tapped into as well. Particularly sort of elite sport, but also just at grassroots as well. So that when you're trying to get people involved and being inclusive in lots of groups, that even volunteer coaches and things like that, all that sort of information would be useful, wouldn't it, to get across to the volunteers, the coaches, and people that are going to be working with them, even from a school level perhaps as well, so that when you're trying to get people involved. So so a further set of questions. I mean, these are projects that you're taking part in and heading up on at the moment. Are there other projects that you wanted to discuss and share with us today?
I can share about our work around sport legacies from mega events. So myself and Simone and a group of colleagues, we've been really lucky, have an amazing team. Dr. Kirsty Forstyke at La Trobe, Professor Simon Darcy at University of Technology, Sydney, Dr. Millicent Kennelly at Griffith, and we've had Professor Holly Thorpe at University of Waikato on that team, and Professor David McGilvery, University of West Scotland, as well as Dr. Didi Bhattacharya has been our research fellow, and Dr. Erin Nichols also helping as a research assistant. So it's a big team. We've done 3 years of work, and that project was called Engaging Outsiders in Sport, Co-creating an Inclusive Legacy for the 2032 Games. So the idea was that in a lot of the kind of bid documents and legacy promises, there is a lot of discourse about increasing sport participation. So that's one of the key promises, is that the reason we're going to host this mega sport event is because we're going to increase well-being and sport participation, among other things, usually transport, maybe housing, some other things. But sport participation is really front and center. So our project is questioning that promise, because there's been quite a lot of research that has shown that actually investment in elite sport doesn't increase sport participation at grassroots levels. So we're taking that premise that hosting an event like the Olympics or the Paralympics, they're stating that they're going to have a sport participation legacy, but how is that going to happen? Who is that going to happen for? So we spent the past 3 years talking to all different kinds of people, policymakers, people working in sport, girls, women, trans people, about, what kind of legacy they might like to see. How could the Olympics and Paralympics support them to participate in sport? We've also spoken to domestic violence services. So, really not the usual suspects. So we haven't targeted people who are already involved in sport. We've tried to talk to those people who are not engaged in sport, because the whole idea of increasing sport participation means you're targeting people who aren't currently participating or who might be participating on the margins. So really trying to reach out and go to people where they're at and understand, what the barriers are for them and how an event like the Olympics and Paralympics could support their sport participation. So it is very, it's complicated, because of course trying to engage people who are disengaged is not easy, and it's it's often just easier just to celebrate the people who are already involved. But this is a multi-billion-dollar public investment, and as a team we believe that there is the potential for the games to have a sport participation legacy for girls and women and non-binary people. So that's what we've been working on. We are releasing a report in a few weeks that summarizes the findings and some of our key recommendations, which are really about centering lived experience in the planning and doing a different kind of consulting. So a lot of the consultation that's happened really just talks to the usual suspects, people who are already engaged, who already love sport, who will benefit from the games. But we're calling for a different type of consultation that finds other ways and creative ways to communicate with people, to hear their stories sensitively as well, that can then inform the planning. So yeah, we've had a couple of articles come out with that and several others in preparation at the moment. And yeah, it's just been a really great experience to think about, what a legacy really could be if we thought about it as, an opportunity to support those who could most benefit from the legacy, rather than this idea of mass legacy, which is often the way that things go.
So in terms of the legacy, is this on the premise that sport and exercise at grassroots level or any form is good for mental well-being and for all.
Yeah, for mental well-being, belonging, social connection, even things like, economic benefits. Like, there are a lot of benefits, but so many people don't have access to that for many reasons, and they're often invisible. You can't articulate them that clearly. I think, there's often a whole range of things that keeps people out of sport.
And I beg your pardon. So carry on, Simone.
I was just going to add a little point to that. I think our project has really tried to bring an intersectional lens to thinking about legacy. So not just thinking about, because we look at the Brisbane 2032 legacy plan, we've got people with disability over here, they want 500,000 more people. That's, ambitious goal. That's great. We've got Indigenous or First Nations people. We've got people with cultural linguistic backgrounds, and gender is kind of mentioned, but it's not strategically embedded across. So it's not really thought about in terms of how to engage women, girls, gender diverse people from different backgrounds, different contexts. And sport, is the word intersectionality, the concept is entering into the language, but it's not there yet in terms of the shift in thinking or the ability to think across those complexities because of, the history and all the things that shape sport cultures. So we really want this project to open up different ways of thinking and practices of listening and engaging that are about, how do we attune to lived experience, and how do we think about that in terms of the systems that we have and the cultures that we create. So we really drew on some interesting methods for this project, and we did things from feminist slam poetry workshops to songwriting workshops where we use those creative methods to engage our participants in kind of reflecting, exploring their individual experience of what constrained or enabled them, and also then collectively bringing that together and translating it into poems that were shared and into songs that could capture something of that powerful affect of generating different ways of understanding. So I think that was an exciting aspect of the project, as well as the actual substantive issues that are being developed.
Definitely. I mean, I really like how you've had a creative output, and you actually produced it with a theatre company as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, we worked with Everybody Now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to engage people and sort of get the imagination and get the thoughts down onto paper or singing in different ways, isn't it? So, are you able to share some of the sorts of the barriers or enablers that you talked about? Because perhaps using the word sport, some people might think, oh, I'm not that sporty. I was never sporty at school, and you always hear that kind of trope where they say, oh, I was never really sporty at school, and perhaps the perception around the socialization that they were within primary or secondary, etc. Could you share a little bit about that? And then
I think that's a really, how you've kind of framed that question is really spot on, in that even as we're recruiting, people are like, oh, but I don't, I don't know anything about sport, or, people thinking that they don't even have a place to be able to talk about sport because, they're not currently involved. And I just remember one particular participant that was in either the poetry or the songwriting workshop, and it was a non-binary young person who was telling us a bit about their experiences of feeling like they didn't belong, and they did a bit of dance, and then they kind of felt like they were outside, and they didn't get an opportunity to try much. And then they said, but I think they said, but I would have really liked it. And it was that comment that, people think that, I don't know, the reason why some people aren't participating is because they just don't want to. But actually, who wouldn't want to have that experience of the fun and joy of sport? You know, it's a pretty cool experience. So there are so many, trying to really explore the layers and complexity of the reasons why people are not participating, which a lot of the times it's not just one thing. It is like an attitude, and it is not feeling welcomed in those spaces for all types of reasons, but often very gendered reasons. Things like body image, body shaming in those spaces can be, especially for people with gender dysphoria, you know, that's going to be even harder. Yeah, I think that it is a lot of those affective aspects that keep people outside of sport. You know, it does cost a lot of money as well, a lot sometimes, to participate in sport. So, of course, you know, people find a way to make it work. But when you don't feel welcome, why would you invest in something where you don't feel welcome? You know, so I think that, yeah, there's a lot of complexities. You know, we reached out to you know, neighborhood centers where we spoke to women who were unemployed, and you know, they had, a lot of them were mothers as well, and they saw the value of sport for their children, and they would, you know, put their children through sport, but for themselves they didn't see the value or the relevance, even though we know how great it can be for mothers to have that space of their own for their mental health, for a whole range of reasons, friendships and things like that. So yeah, a lot of different things. Yeah.
And I think that whole
thoughts.
I think that
excuse me, Simone, carry on, please.
The point about not identifying with being sporty is, yeah, it's something that I've heard throughout my whole career. And I think it really speaks to the issue that we don't give enough attention to, and that is, you know, well, how does sport feel in terms of embodied movement? You know, yes, it can be challenging and highly competitive and risk-taking. For some, that's the source of pleasure and enjoyment. And for others, it's just being able to move individually, but also collectively, being amongst other bodies. It's, you know, creates a whole different kind of level of engagement. And yeah, whether it's the fun or the social connection or the release of stress and the, you know, the whole adrenaline, the calm afterwards, the challenge and mastery, all of those things are very visceral, felt experiences. And I think in Western culture, where we're, you know, we so privilege the mind and reason, and women are so overloaded with tasks and emotional labor for everybody's lives and organizing things, that the valuing of enjoyable embodied experiences gets very lost in that, and gets very kind of commodified now in the wellness industry. And so I think, you know, there's lots of challenges in terms of how we think about what does a sporting body look and feel like, and how do we create spaces and organize times and offerings of different kinds of sports. So social sport and informal offerings, as well as your competitive sport, is so important. And we are seeing more sport organizations having to do that because membership's declining and people's lives are more complicated. So I think that's a kind of positive direction, like opening it up. You know, how can it be different? How can we reimagine the sporting body? And yeah, what does it need to look and feel like? Because, you know, women's lives in particular are very constrained by so many societal forces and structures that, you know, opening up those spaces for having some freedom is really important, and can also kind of then generate different changes in someone's life when they feel like they've got a bit more space and freedom and maybe some more confidence and a sense of agentic capacity, you know, all those flow-on effects and benefits. So it is a different way of thinking. It's like an opening up and a critique of what currently exists, but then being able to research and understand what it could be. And that, I think, is where research is so important, because if we're listening to for those differences and creative moments where change can happen, then it's more likely that we can get traction for that. Whereas sometimes it's just closing down, doing the same old thing, which doesn't always work, as we know.
Just like adding to that, thinking about roller derby as it emerged on the scene in providing something different, something that attracted so many women and gender diverse people, and then men as well, to do something new and different with their bodies. And that's why I do love the idea of like new sports or new sporting phenomena, new ways of moving our body, because sometimes it's like a permission to try something different because it's something new. Another example was in that project about legacy, there was a field hockey program for recently arrived refugees, Yazidi refugees, women and men, but women, we focused on the women in particular, and that was a completely new sport for them. So a lot of sport for development programs will use football because that's the world game and that's what they know. But football is very male dominated, particularly in these cultures, whereas hockey was new for both the men and the women. So it was a space where they could come together and try something new together. So yeah, I think that that idea of novelty, of finding that opportunity where someone says, that gives themselves permission to try something new and open this new vista for themselves is really important.
I think,
I suppose that's why you get ultra marathon running and things like that, because there's always that challenge of trying something different with your body, doing something that, you never thought you would do. There's something really exciting about that.
Sure. And like for some of the women that I interviewed, those that had families, some of them perceive themselves as not being sporty at school, but then when they wanted to perhaps lose a bit of weight post baby, that sort of thing, and they got into doing a few little runs, and then that kind of evolved into, this is my own time, this is my own headspace. Oh, and I'm actually okay at doing this, I'm quite good at, and then there's a little community and that confidence building, and then they try a little bit more. And so I think that element, that sort of being out on your own, having that time with a pair of shoes or a bike or whatever, was their time away from responsibilities as well. So yeah, I think as well, when you were talking about trying something new, I mean, I grew up in a kind of traditional sports environment where the boys did football, cricket in the winter, and I had to choose between netball and hockey, and then it was tennis, and we all did tennis or athletics. And so it was quite a traditional sort of grammar school. It wasn't a grammar school, but it was an old grammar school, so that it was very organized, so that we weren't able to swap over or do any of those different sports. So for me to kick a ball and to learn to do something like that, you've got that hand-foot coordination, haven't you, as opposed to hand-eye coordination, things like that. So I think that's an interesting point that you made about with the refugee group, in that with hockey you can do mixed hockey, whereas sometimes at a certain level you can't compete together or be in the same team environment either, can you? So that's a different space as well. And then the space on the actual hockey pitch as well is quite who goes up to the front and scores, or who's in the goal or at the back, because what you do with even within that sense and learning those particular skills is quite an interesting format as well. But so for example, with new sports that have been introduced into the Olympics and the Winter Olympics, in fact, the Paralympics, etc., I think all of that would add to the media of showing that there are lots of different types in the more contemporary sports as well. So but it's having that access to it, and then also the kind of forces that are at play with what have they been open to at school or out of school? Do they have supportive parents? What do their friends do, etc.? So there's lots of different cultural changes, and it's how that transfers across to different countries as well, because I'm not sure, you know, how that can transfer across, or it has to be adapted, I'm guessing, to be in a wider context around the world as well.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that point, because it relates to our other ARC project addressing the gender gap in disability sport. When we've just started this project, we're doing a national survey, be the first one in Australia to look at the experiences of women, girls, and non-binary people with disabilities, 16 years and over, because we recognised there's a massive policy gap. We've got all these women's in sport programs, and then we have disability sport where gender's not thought about. So we really need that intersectional focus. And there are very few resources out there that actually can help sport organisations of all kinds think about creating new offerings and create different ways of visualising disability and gender, and have those lived experiences feed into not just how policies formulate, but the challenges of implementation and what does it look like on the ground in organisations, creating welcoming spaces and with different stories and images. And so this project is going to use some co-creation, co-design methods, as well as the survey, to really bring that lived experience into working with the organisations. We've got a number of, I think we've got 7 sport organisation partners, and it's really working collaboratively to create a shared understanding and to really feed into organisational learning, recognising that cultures don't change overnight and that everyone is in a different space in terms of learning to think more intersectionally, and that we can always learn something new. So not just in the playing of sport, but in the delivering of sport. So I think those ideas can help kind of bring fresh understandings and perspectives that are directly addressing inequality, but perhaps from a different angle, because I think, you know, there is that issue of, oh, well, we can see women in sport everywhere. That's been done. We can tick that box. But actually, no, if we think about intersectionally, we've got a lot of work to do still to open up spaces, and to also think about how it flows through into leadership and decision making, where that structural power lies.
Definitely. And resources and the funding to help support those findings as well. To the point of the refugees that were there, which country did they come from, for them not to have experienced hockey?
They were Yazidi people from Iran and Syria. So they were the victims of genocide from ISIS. So they had, they were living in refugee camps for a while. They played some volleyball there and football. They wouldn't have had that experience. They didn't really know about hockey before then.
And did the sport help in terms of them dealing with the trauma of what they were experiencing?
Yeah, it did. The hockey program was set up because they were in like a rural regional town that just didn't have the psychologists and GPs to be able to support everybody. And so the multicultural health person, she was a big believer in sport being a great outlet. And so she partnered with the Toowoomba hockey and helped them set up this hockey program. And it was just a really wonderful thing. Like it gave them somewhere to go. Volunteers would pick them up and drop them off and play with them. So they got to meet all these different people in the community. Friendships formed, they shared meals, they had afternoon tea afterwards. And these volunteers would go to where they were. Again, I think that's a really important thing, not just having a program, but they went to TAFE it's like a vocational where they learn English. So they went to the place where these recently arrived refugees were to deliver skills and the program and get to know them before then inviting them to the hockey fields, which is a really important part. And yeah, just going and watching them on the field and, you know, seeing them really, really having a great time. They really, really loved it. It gave them a time to not think about, you know, what they'd experienced, and time to just have fun and be young people. They were mostly young people. And yeah, it's now been showcased by the International Hockey Federation, a really great case of what can be done with very little funding as well, I think. Yeah, just using, but, you know, of course, it's very contextual. It had a particular person who really drove it and who brought a really curious mind to that work. They had the volunteers that just happened to have some really great expertise. So it's not necessarily something that you can just kind of copy and paste, but it's a good example of the multiple kind of dimensions of movement, you know, the car trips as well as the morning teas, going out to them and then inviting them into your space. So a whole different range of movement to create that experience for these people. And the really cool thing is some of them have moved from the like targeted program into some teams now. So they first started with just like a hockey, you know, summer competition, and now some of them are in the regular competition and really enjoying it. And this is within like a year or two of arriving in Australia, having come from a refugee camp, having experienced some, you know, really horrendous violence. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That just highlights, doesn't it, how having those opportunities that they've perhaps not had, they just can sail away with that and take it. And so just shows how giving those opportunities and quite a diverse range of different opportunities, and then somebody will take that and run with it, so to speak. You were talking about violence. Could you talk us a little about the Arc Discovery, which was creating safer sport communities, and talk about that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, sure. This is a 3-year project that we've just started, and it's led by Associate Professor Kirsty Forsdyke at La Trobe University down in Melbourne, and a big team. We have begun doing concept mapping and really exploring what gender-based violence in sport looks like. So that's involved looking at engaging a whole lot of sport academics and those working in the sports sector to map out kind of identified typologies. And then we're putting together a national survey to look at the prevalence of gender-based violence in sport. That hasn't been yet done in Australia. There's a big need for that. And then following on from that, the latter years, the 3-year project will be some qualitative research looking at the experiences of survivors of violence in rural and urban communities. So we're really interested in those place-based dynamics because particularly in rural communities, you know, perpetrators of violence can have multiple roles in a community. They might be the local plumber. They might be captain of the football team or on the committee. They might be in the volunteer fire brigade. And the complexities of negotiating that for sport organisations is huge. So we really want to be developing a nuanced understanding. So thinking about gender-based violence on that continuum of, you know, disrespect and inequality through to various forms of violence that happens in various sport contexts. So we're not talking necessarily on the field, that might be part of it, in clubhouses, but online as well. You know, trying to grapple with the complexities of the online environment, and then coming up with some co-created resources that will actually be helpful for clubs and sport organisations to implement. Because again, it's the challenge of policy implementation. You can have the best policy in the world, but actually it means nothing unless it can be adapted and contextualised to what the culture of the local club or sport environment is. So that's, that's just starting that project. But it also overlaps with our Outsiders in Sport project that Kirsty's also involved in, around looking at the perceptions of domestic violence workers and organisations, around what needs to happen to ensure that we have safe games coming up to Brisbane 2032, and understanding the importance of the violence prevention workforce, their knowledge, and how that is often not engaged with or understood well in sport. So often our policies, we've got women and violence prevention policies over here, we've got sport policies over there. So we're really trying to break down those silos across a couple of our projects and really bring that gendered lens to say, actually, violence inequality is everywhere, and sport contributes to that. It also has an important prevention role and recovery, trauma-informed, approach is going to be really important to help people who've experienced violence in various contexts. So I think that is, quite a challenging topic for sport to be thinking about, but it's also crucial if we are to really ensure that sport is for everyone and it is safe.
Going on to that, in terms of gender-based violence, are you able to sort of clarify and explain the different types of gender-based violence in a bit more detail in and out of sport? And so if someone was not sure if they were experiencing, or if they knew somebody, how would they know, or that this is wrong, or how to identify and speak to somebody about it, etc.? If you could give a little bit of detail about that.
So yeah, when we're talking about gender-based violence, we are talking about recognizing that the predominant source of violence against women and gender diverse people and men is actually men. So male violence is a huge issue, and so we understand that in the kind of context of patriarchal culture, where that may be physical violence, sexual violence, emotional, psychological violence. And in Queensland, our state, we also have laws now about coercive control. So, yeah, the way in which women and gender diverse people's lives are being negatively impacted and controlled, and harm is being caused, it's predominantly by men. So we have, this issue, this question around masculinity and the role of sport in contributing to hyper-masculine controlling ideas for men. And also there's, lots of contexts in which this plays out, and some of them are really nuanced, and that's why it's so important to have a trauma-informed approach. Because if we think about coaching, for example, we've got, unequal power relations between athletes and their coaches, and we have the phenomenon of grooming, where, young people can be groomed by their coach and feel like they are treated as special, and it really can minimize the harm and abuse that they've experienced. And we've seen, a number of cases where that has been through the courts, but it's very difficult often to get evidence. So yeah, these are really complex and traumatic processes for people to go through. So there is a large underreporting aspect of gender-based violence. And in this project, we're looking at adults, but we're also capturing childhood experiences that have shaped adults, because we know child abuse is a pervasive issue in our society. So it's really bringing attention to the harms that have been caused by violence, and often that is not just the violence itself, but the lack of response. So the lack of response or care or accountability by sport organisations or in other organisations and people who could step in to do something or to respond in an appropriate way with care and concern. So there's I think levels to this. There's institutional responsibility, and we're seeing more of that accountability expected across the world, with the Larry Nassar case and gymnastics in America, and we've had the same issues in Australia. But it is all sports, and I think we now have greater policy frameworks in Australia. We have Sport Integrity Australia, but they largely focus on children. Of course, very important, but we have some gaps there in terms of how do we think about gender-based violence more broadly, and what do we do about it. So it's, I think, a really challenging topic to address, because there are many myths and assumptions, and historically women have been blamed for, for example, sexual assault or rape, asking for it. So, all of these things have to be kind of unpacked, and there's a kind of careful path to tread in terms of engaging with survivors and their experiences, so that we better understand what that appropriate response could be and what actions can be taken. And importantly, men have a role to play as allies in that too. So how do they call out inappropriate behaviour early on? How do we create safe cultures that are built on respect? And what does respect look and feel like from the perspective of women and gender diverse people? So really having that understood well, because the sport has been historically that site where there's been a lot of banter, just laugh it off, all of that stuff has to be addressed, and it's quite challenging to address it head on because there's resistance and backlash. Yes, plenty to explore in terms of power relations and the effective dynamics of that, in terms of organisational change.
There's huge amounts of questions that come into all of that in different levels. So, for example, at Olympic elite level, looking at the pain and the violence, or the type of the level of what you're supposed to endure in terms of for your sport, and the different sports themselves, and culturally different countries, and the work ethic as well, and the ethics of coaches, the expectation of what one is expected to endure as well. But then also looking at if from the coaching point of view, it sort of highlights, perhaps if it's male coaches, that there's a lack of female coaches within the organization, or having females at that high level, the policy making level as well, isn't it? So there's lots of different ways there to disseminate all those different findings. And then again, transferring that across the different countries, isn't it? Because obviously you're doing this work in Australia. How does that translate across, and can that be worked across from different cultural sides of the globe as well? Does that?
I think
that kind of...
I think it's. I just wanted to talk about. We, have got a memorandum of understanding with the Global Observatory for Gender Equality in Sport. They're based in Lausanne in Switzerland. And so we're a partner organisation in Australia, and there's a few in Australia, around the world. And I think that is about trying to share knowledge, knowledge translation, learning from each other around the world in different contexts. And what I think that we find is that although there may be differences, there is a lot more similarities in terms of the experiences of women and gender diverse people. The experiences are similar in terms of, marginalization, violence, control, power dynamics. So, but that is really important, that we have that kind of global forum to be able to share research and, learn from each other.
Definitely. So do you have any sort of further recommendations of research for any listeners here that are listening along, and they, what would you like to see change how the future gaps, knowledge What are your recommendations?
Okay, how long's a piece of string? This is a great question.
Well, it's an open forum for you. This is your
Yeah,
opportunity.
thank you. Look, I think we are seeing a growing momentum around change and increased expectations that sport will be safe and that equality will be seriously addressed. I think what our research is hoping to do is just to continually present evidence in the broader sense, because it's not us that makes the decisions about how things happen in sport. We do the research, but we have to be cleverer, and we're trying to do that more through partnerships and through webinars and all kinds of non-academic ways to have that impact, because it's those critical conversations, and we are independent researchers, so we have a privileged position to be able to speak about research and ask the critical questions and say, well, this is what the research is saying, so that we can feed into those policy discussions at every level, whether it's a club level, or the national sport organisation level and beyond. So I think one of the things that we've been trying to do recently is really focus on the question of leadership. So we've partnered with not only the Global Observatory for Sport and Gender Equality, but also our local peak body in Queensland called Q Sport. And we've developed a gender equity and sport leadership seminar series, so we can engage professionals and academics if they like to come along. But it's really aimed at professionals working in the sector to really have some time and space to think critically and collaboratively about leadership and what that looks like beyond a masculine model, and to open up those questions and create networks of support so that we can have more women and gender diverse people and male allies doing the kind of work around decision making, opening up opportunities so that we are creating spaces for these issues to be heard and for change to happen. And it does need to happen at all kind of leadership levels, but we feel like that's been a really good opportunity this year to start that collaboration. And every time we start something else emerges out of it. So I think that's the great thing about research, and it's very generative if we follow through what that impact could be. And often we don't really know what it looks like when we start a project, which is the fantastic thing about it, because you're always learning something new and opportunities to share that, to keep evolving. So I think it's not so much a recommendation of what should happen, but it's more the how. We have to keep exploring how and what processes we use to keep engaging and sharing knowledge.
Definitely. Adele, do you have anything else?
I guess thinking about, that was a big question, recommendations, but something that comes up again and again is this need for like a individual and social reckoning. Like, what is sport for? Who is it for? To continue to ask these questions, and also about gender as well. I think that ideas of the kind of binary categories of men and women, also need a reckoning, thinking about, well, what is it that what am I scared of? I think that's a question to be asked for people working in sport, to males who might be using violence. What am I afraid of, and what might be on the other side of that fear? And that's why I do think that the feminist theories of affect that we kind of bring into the research are important, because it is trying to get at that unspoken other dimension of experience. So that would be my recommendation, to just for people to kind of reckon with their own biases and assumptions about sport, and imagine what it could be if we were open to something a bit different, that might be more inclusive, and it might not be as lucrative or as spectacular, but in that kind of re-evaluation, it might be open to more people to have those benefits and opportunities.
So it sounds like a real critical reflection or self-awareness internally, looking at the norms and influences that people have had previously, to then question, is that, where has this perhaps come from, and what impact is that having, and then looking at how
I think
to change it as
questioning
well.
our privilege as well,
Yeah.
being able to like acknowledge our privilege, from what position are we speaking when we say that, a sport is fine how it is, or this is what's fair, or this is what it should be. What position are you speaking from when you say that? Yeah.
And also hearing the voices of the people who, the stakeholders themselves, the people who we want to get involved as well, and listening to them and what they want ultimately, because making decisions based on not listening to them would be a bizarre thing, wouldn't it, really? So it's actually like you're gaining all the, through creative methods, a variety of different inputs and experiences, aren't you? So that sounds like an interesting thing. So is there anything else? I mean, we've talked a lot and we can still talk, and I'm very happy to keep talking because I find this fascinating. But are there any other projects or works that you would like to tell the listeners about before we start sort of wrapping up the interview?
There's one project that I haven't spoken about yet that I think is interesting to bring into the mix, because it is about major sport events and legacy. And it's a project I've worked on with Professor Sally Shaw at Otago University in New Zealand. And it's about the queer fans of football. So I was looking at legacies from the Women's World Cup that was held in Australia and New Zealand years ago, and looking at the kind of paradox. I think just thinking about what you said about, isn't it weird how sports sometimes don't even engage the people they're meant to be serving, really? And we know that queer women have been, a big part of football, both players and fans, and yet in the legacy plans for that event, they were invisible. And so we did a survey to look at those experiences and to hear more about what they would like in terms of future offerings, major event type engagement, but also local leagues. And we heard a lot of really creative ideas about, queer leagues, about recognizing fans' expertise that could inform the kind of marketing and promotion of future events, and just all of the things to really address homophobia and discrimination and the heterosexism that pervades sport. So that was a relatively contained project, and it's something that is an example of what sports can do and need to be doing more often. Otherwise, they really risk alienating their fans and their participants. And with social media these days, that's a massive risk organisationally. So if sports don't attune to who their fans are and don't get to know them and don't respond to them respectfully, then they are going to lose members. They're going to, not be competitive in their own terms as organisations, and also their social licence becomes undermined. So, I think there's a real risk for sports, and a great opportunity to do a lot more if they thought about engagement and research and other forms of connecting with people and listening to their stories more seriously.
Well, I think that could transfer across into a whole variety of different sports. Because not everybody is going to love football, but they may love hockey or skateboarding, or there's going to be a whole variety of different sport. You're not pigeonholed straight into just one particular sport. It crosses all over. It could be climbing, could be extreme ultra endurance or something like that as well. So that sort of could feed out into a lot of different projects, really, couldn't it, in terms of getting the fan base, the media, normalizing the whole idea that everybody takes part, inclusivity, etc. So that whole gender and equity as well. So yeah, that sounds really interesting. Adele, did you have anything else?
Probably just the last one. Just a couple of articles, a smallish project around strength and conditioning coaches' understanding of gender. So there's a couple of articles there where I interviewed strength and conditioning coaches about gender, and these were elite strength and conditioning coaches working with high performance athletes. So the highest qualification of strength and conditioning. And yeah, they just, maybe in a whole degree, they may have had 1 week of one course that talked about women. And often it just focused on, reds or a few key things. It was seen as a special population. So the coaches were quite unsure about, it's like they coached, a lot of them had experience coaching women, and so they had their ideas, but they didn't really have a good understanding, and there was a lot of resistance. So there was one coach who ended up quite, at first he was a bit defensive. He emailed me and he said that, I was kind of trying to push a queer agenda or something like that. And I asked him whether he wanted to talk about it, and he said yes. And we ended up having a really great conversation, because he at first was trying to say that gender doesn't exist, only sex exists. And we had a really great chat about how, some things have absolutely nothing to do with somebody's sex, and it's about gender. And he shared about his mum was a sole parent. And I said, well, was her experience about her gender or her sex? And he said, oh, it's about her gender. And that was a really kind of opening moment in the conversation to start to think about, this difference between gender and biological sex, and things like gender norms and pressures and stereotypes, and how that will influence opportunities and the way that people approach coaching. So yeah, that was a really, really cool, fun project. Having these difficult conversations about gender difference, I think, are worthwhile, and not something to be shied away from, to continue having those conversations. And that even for the women that I interviewed, I think that was really interesting as well, because they may have there was one in particular who started her career and who thought that she didn't really identify as someone with a lot of empathy, or, she didn't really think gender was an issue, until as she got more senior. And then she had some very gendered experiences, like being asked to share a room with her boss, her male boss, when traveling. And some awkward moments like that started her on a bit of a journey towards thinking more about her gender and her gender in her coaching practice as well. And then she ended up going to some kind of women in sport event where she was kind of introduced to some concepts about gender. And from there, starting to think about, what she had to offer in coaching women as well as men. So what we're seeing, and I'm sure that, you know about this, as women's sport becomes more popular and more economically lucrative, a lot of men who previously weren't interested in coaching women's teams are now saying, well, I'm an expert, I'll come and coach this women's team. And so thinking about the value of lived experience in coaching, having a woman coach, what are the benefits of that? It's not cut and dry, like a binary where, a woman must have a woman and a man must have a man, but opening up those conversations to, there are particular benefits if somebody is very reflexive in their practice. They can bring that to the coaching experience.
Yeah, certainly. And in terms of whether one size fits all, if you're devising the strength and conditioning program, is that exactly the same for all athletes, or how is that tailored and individualized? Because you'd individualize that between people anyway, regardless of male, female, or gender. But it's then, how are you then having an extra input if you have to think about certain unique challenges that perhaps women face as well, perhaps, and having that
that's the
understanding,
good
isn't
thing.
it?
Yeah, most, the coaches did definitely like see their athlete, but because some of them didn't have a broader understanding of the gendered pressures, that some bodies might have experienced that, others don't. That was kind of a missing piece. So I think everybody is really trying and wanting to do the best they can, but often will fall on old assumptions around things like some hip ratio and weaknesses in women's bodies, rather than first going to the environment, the context, the pressures, the gendered pressures. It will be, oh well, their bodies aren't suited to it, or I learnt this, one study said this, so therefore women's bodies are weaker in this area.
Of course, I mean, our wombs would drop out if we ran much faster than 100 meters, sort of.
Yes,
idea.
Exactly.
Or I actually saw something the other day. It was cycling face to put women off from cycling, and that your face would stay like in this grimace position, and so it was advisable not to do that. It wasn't very feminine, sort of thing. These sort of gendered norms and different things like that. So yeah. I guess as well, for those strength and conditioning coaches, it's sort of developing their confidence to feel that they can provide individualized training programs, but that's based on evidence and research, and all this further research that's coming out now as well, to help share all of the information that's coming out. So yeah. So I'm guessing that have we exhausted all of your projects and different articles and things like that?
I don't think anyone wants to keep listening. They're welcome to read. All of our articles are online. If there's anyone who can't get access to something, they're welcome to email us, and we're happy to share copies, including books, book chapters if you're interested, which are always a bit harder to get access to. And we also have our sport and gender equity website, which has a lot of resources on it, information about all our projects. There's also a seminar series that we record, so that's us in conversation with other people as well, covering a whole range of topics.
So we'll put all of those links into the podcast as well. And Simone, you were just about to say something then?
I was just going to say the website's being updated, so yeah, but there's plenty of resources on there, and yeah, we're very happy to hear from people, because it is a global conversation, as Adele was saying, and yeah, I really encourage people to also connect with the Global Observatory, because there's a lot of interest there in really joining up what's happening across different countries, academic and professional sport networks. But thank you very much, Britta. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, so have a good rest of the week, and probably the weekend now for you, I would imagine, or in terms of maybe you've still got some teaching time left. But yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much. And I will speak to you very soon, hopefully again, just to get some more updates on any of your other projects and research. Take care.
That would be great.
Thanks,
you. Britta.
Bye.
Well, that's it for this episode. If today's conversation has sparked something in you, we'd love to hear about it. Find us on the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network website, WISEN for short, and tell us your story. And if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. It genuinely helps more women find us. Until next time.